What if I told you that beyond the shimmering crowns and courtly whispers of Europe's grandest palaces lies the story of a princess who risked everything to save lives under Nazi rule, and then chose to live as a penniless nun in her final days? Welcome to the extraordinary world of Princess Alice of Battenberg. Born at Windsor Castle under Queen Victoria's watchful eye, she tore through the pages of history with acts of quiet heroism, intense faith, and a personal battle against a misdiagnosed mental illness. Join me as we uncover how this little-known royal overcame deafness and exile to become one of the 20th century's most unsung heroines. Picture a corridor in Windsor Castle, steeped in centuries of pageantry and tradition, its walls echoing with the whispers of monarchs long gone. Rich tapestries hang in solemn grandeur, and it's easy to imagine courtly footsteps shuffling across the polished floors as lords, ladies, and staff hurry about their regal duties. Now follow these corridors deeper into the castle, toward a room draped in ornate fabrics. This is the Tapestry Room. And here on February 25th, 1885, a remarkable child came into the world. Her name was Victoria Alice Elizabeth Julia Marie, though history would remember her simply as Princess Alice of Battenberg. She was born in the presence of her formidable great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, who looked upon her first cries with the same scrutiny the Queen gave everything, a mix of curiosity, pride, and the faintest hint of concern for the future. Little could anyone have guessed in that splendid moment of birth that this girl's trajectory would carry her from gilded halls to a sanatorium in Switzerland, from a cradle of European royalty to exile on a battleship, a baby hidden in a makeshift fruit crate, from the heart of the British monarchy to the impoverished back streets of Nazi-occupied Athens. Hers was a life shaped by personal hardship and the seismic shifts of 20th century geopolitics. A tapestry as richly woven as any that adorned Windsor's walls, but marked equally by frayed threads of tragedy, displacement, and misunderstanding. She was on paper destined for a relatively modest position within Europe's sprawling network of royal families, certainly lower on the totem pole than many of her illustrious cousins. But that family web was more complicated than even the best genealogists could diagram. Her mother, Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine, was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, tying little Alice to the British crown. Her father, Prince Louis of Battenberg, was connected to the German nobility. Her paternal grandmother, Princess Julia of Battenberg, would become a crucial figure in understanding Alice's early challenges. And her paternal aunt was Empress Alexandra of Russia, who loomed large in history as the last empress of that empire. Through that same labyrinth of bloodlines, Alice's cousin was Kaiser Wilhelm II, the man at Germany's helm in the lead-up to World War I. Hence, from day one, a swirl of national allegiances, British, German, Russian, Greek, enveloped Princess Alice, a complexity that would both enrich and endanger her in the years to come. And yet in the hush of those first months and years at Windsor and beyond, a single question began to gnaw at her parents. Why wasn't Alice speaking? The weeks passed, then months. Medical experts were discreetly consulted. One can imagine them tiptoeing into lofty drawing rooms, conferring in low tones with Alice's worried mother. Eventually, a small sigh of relief. The toddler did manage her first halting words, but soon another problem became apparent. She was struggling quite seriously with pronunciation. Doctors raised eyebrows. By the standards of the day, something was definitely amiss. It was Alice's paternal grandmother, Princess Julia of Battenberg, who finally pinpointed the cause. Young Alice was deaf. In retrospect, it explained so much. The silence that seemed to envelop her, the delayed and muddled speech. In the context of late Victorian aristocracy, this was significant. Deafness wasn't widely understood, and it threatened to isolate Alice socially. Yet while her parents likely felt despair and confusion, her mother, Princess Victoria, also recognized something else. Behind Alice's quiet eyes there was a sharp mind. She took a personal interest in the child's education, guiding her into lip reading and articulation exercises that would have been arduous even for the most dedicated tutors. Before long, Alice was speaking and lip reading in both English and German, a testament to her tenacity. Her mastery of lip reading in multiple languages would become one of the most extraordinary elements of her character, an indication that obstacles were there to be surmounted, not surrendered to. As the years passed, Alice blossomed into a reserved yet strikingly intelligent young woman. She spent time in Germany, Britain, and Malta, absorbing different cultures and adding fluency in French to her linguistic arsenal. She didn't just memorize vocabulary, she seemed to have an innate knack for communicating through gesture and reading subtle facial movements, essential skills for someone with her hearing impairment. Quiet though she might have been, her composure and grace caught many an admirer's eye. It wasn't long before Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, a tall and charming figure of the Greek royal family, noticed her. Their courtship culminated in a grand wedding on October 6, 1903, in Darmstadt, a spectacle of regal splendor featuring bejeweled guests from the far corners of Europe. Queen Victoria had passed away by then, but the sense of her looming presence was everywhere. This was a union forged within the interwoven tapestry of European crowns that the late Queen had helped shape through her descendants. Transitioning to life in Greece was an adventure in itself. The Greek royal house, rooted in the tumultuous politics of a young nation-state still grappling with republican movements and shifting alliances, was far from serene. Yet for a while, Alice seemed content. She embraced Greek orthodoxy, immersed herself in the language, and bore 4 daughters, Margarita, Theodora, Cecilia, and Sophie, before giving birth to her only son Philip in 1921. These were, by many accounts, the best of times for her. She was a mother of a lively brood, presiding over a household that combined British reserve with Greek warmth. She loved immersing herself in religious rites and traditions that felt mystical and profound. As a princess in a foreign court, she navigated a precarious balance, but she seemed to manage it with humility and an intrinsic curiosity about Greek culture. Politics, however, were churning beneath the surface. Greece became embroiled in the Greco-Turkish War, 1919 to 1922, which ended in a humiliating defeat for the Greeks. The monarchy's fortunes rose and fell abruptly, depending on the populace's sentiments and the outcome of military campaigns. King Constantine, Prince Andrew's brother, was temporarily restored to the throne in 1920, allowing Alice and her family to return to a semblance of normal life in Athens. But it didn't last. The military coup that followed the disastrous conclusion to the war aimed its ire at certain members of the royal family. Prince Andrew, who had served in the Greek army, was singled out for blame in the debacle, and punishment loomed. Suddenly, the princess was in grave danger. The entire Greek monarchy was once again teetering on the brink of ruin. With revolution in the air, Alice had far more to fear than many others in the royal circle. Her multifaceted identity, bridging British, German, and Greek lines, placed her in a precarious spot. Soon, exile became inevitable. In 1922, the family fled Corfu under heart-stopping circumstances. A British warship transported them to safety, a sign that despite her father's German background and her own confusing identity, Alice could still rely on British connections in a time of crisis. Legend has it that infant Philip was carried to the ship in a makeshift crib, cobbled together from a fruit crate, an image that underscores the stark vulnerability of exile. Royal titles and illusions of grandeur do little good when one is fleeing for their life. From Corfu, they landed in Italy, then made their way to Paris, where a network of exiled royals and aristocrats tried to eke out some sense of normalcy. Yet normalcy was elusive. In the interwar period, suspicion of any German ties ran high in Britain, where Alice's father had dramatically anglicized the family name from Battenberg to Mountbatten during World War I. Meanwhile, the fragile identity of the Greek throne, battered by the population's discontent, made it unlikely that Alice could find a permanent haven in Athens anytime soon. The sense of displacement was palpable. She was Greek by marriage, British by birth, and German by paternal heritage, living in French exile alongside a husband who was dejected and searching for meaning. Amid these upheavals, Alice began to exhibit signs of mental distress in the late 1920s. Friends and family noticed that her once composed demeanor was fraying at the edges. She complained of hearing divine voices, experienced visions, and seemed consumed by spiritual ecstasy. By modern standards, one might surmise that the turmoil she endured, exile, the threat to her husband's life, constant displacement, could have triggered anxiety or depression. But in that era, mental health diagnoses were both rudimentary and marred by bias. The famed Sigmund Freud was consulted along with other psychiatrists. Their conclusion: Princess Alice was suffering from schizophrenia. Freud, operating under then current theories, advocated a drastic and disturbing treatment, X-raying her ovaries to stifle what he believed was a wayward libido fueling her delusions. It's difficult for us now to imagine the heartbreak and confusion that must have accompanied her forced admission to a Swiss sanatorium in Kreuzlingen. Neither her husband nor her mother, Princess Victoria, had bothered to secure her consent. She was simply removed from her life and her children, an act carried out in the name of medical necessity. Here was a princess who had once been cosseted in palatial surroundings, now confined to a stark institution where her letters were censored, her freedoms curtailed, and her sense of betrayal immense. The sweet echoes of her children's voices, particularly young Philip, then around 9 years old, must have receded like a memory, replaced by the sterile hush of hospital corridors. One envisions her sitting in a courtyard, staring at the bars on the windows, furious at her predicament, convinced that her spiritual experiences were not the product of madness, but of authentic faith. She would later vehemently dispute the diagnosis, attributing her visions to mystic religious encounters. Philip, for his part, was sent to live with relatives, most notably Alice's brother, now Lord Louis Mountbatten. The fractured family ties would scar mother and son alike. Alice's daughters, too, scattered to various corners of aristocratic Europe. In that dispersal, the seeds of future tension were sown. She left the sanatorium in 1932, but the damage was done. Her relationship with Prince Andrew deteriorated irreparably. He drifted into a life of leisure on the Riviera, possibly with a mistress, and would die in Monte Carlo in 1944. Freed from the institution, Alice roamed Europe, searching for a sense of belonging, dogged by the stigma of her mental health ordeal. Some called her eccentric, others pitied her, and still others whispered that perhaps the psychiatrists had acted too rashly. On paper, she was a princess of Greece and Denmark. In practice, she seemed a wanderer without a true home. Then came World War II. Having weathered the storm of one global conflict, Europe was plunged yet again into chaos. fascist regimes spread across the continent, and Nazi Germany occupied Greece in 1941. With her daughters married to German princes, two of whom were associated with the Nazi Party, Alice's position seemed once more fraught with peril. Eyes turned suspiciously to her. Was she loyal to the Allies, to the Germans, the Greeks, or to some ineffable notion of faith that transcended national boundaries? But Alice's actions in Athens during the war left no doubt as to her moral compass. She set up soup kitchens to feed the hungry, aided the Red Cross, and most bravely sheltered a Jewish family named the Cohens in her home, hiding them in plain sight from Nazi officials. Her skill at lip reading became a covert asset. When German officers questioned her, she often feigned ignorance, letting them think her deafness prevented her from understanding their demands. One can picture her standing there in her modest attire, presumably an unassuming figure, though inside beat the heart of a lion. Her success in concealing the Cohens was a testament to her courage and cunning. Decades later, this act of humanity would be formally acknowledged by Yad Vashem, naming her righteous among the nations. But at the time, it was a quiet and dangerous undertaking. After the war, Greece descended into a vicious civil conflict, further tearing apart a country already battered by foreign occupation. Alice returned nonetheless, drawn back to Athens and determined to put her faith into action. In 1949, she established the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, a small nursing order of Greek Orthodox women dedicated to serving the poor, sick, and marginalized. Suddenly, the once glamorous princess was clad in a sober gray habit, chain-smoking cigarettes, and devoting her days to charitable works. Even her speech, the product of so many years of careful lip-reading and articulation practice, seemed adapted to the environment of nuns, patients, and those overlooked by society. Some in her extended family, including the Greek royal court, viewed this behavior as bizarre. Others found it admirable. Most simply didn't know what to make of a princess turned nun who insisted on living in near poverty. To the British royal family, Alice was a figure of mild embarrassment and profound fascination in equal measure. When her son Philip married the future Queen Elizabeth II, the world's eyes turned to the newly minted Duke of Edinburgh and his regal bride. Alice appeared as a somewhat spectral figure in these celebrations, a mother from a distant, half-forgotten era of intermarried royals whose fortunes had collapsed. Later, when a military coup in Greece in 1967 forced her to leave Athens yet again, she was invited by Philip and Elizabeth to live at Buckingham Palace. One can imagine the stir this caused among the palace's staff. A chain-smoking nun, wearing austere religious garb, taking up residence in the quarters of British pomp. Courtiers reportedly found her frank discussions of spiritual matters off-putting, and the lingering shadow of her past institutionalization hovered in the air. Yet in that grand edifice she at least found relative safety and a measure of closeness to her son after years of estrangement. Tragedy, however, had not finished with her. Decades prior, in 1937, she had suffered the devastating loss of her daughter Cecilia in a plane crash, a blow that cut Alice to the core. In that same crash, Cecilia's husband, Georg Donatus of Hesse, and their young children perished. Adding to the horror, the funeral took place in Germany under the watchful presence of Nazi officials, an appalling spectacle that only deepened Alice's grief. She never fully recovered from that heartbreak, carrying it silently through all her acts of charity and devotion. Even her final days at Buckingham Palace were lived under the weight of that loss, as though each breath carried the memory of those funerals and the knowledge that so much of her family had scattered or died prematurely. On December 5th, 1969, Princess Alice passed away in Buckingham Palace at the age of 84. By then, her once restless spirit had quieted to a kind of resigned acceptance. She left behind a note for Philip: "I am sure you will do your best to be a good husband," as if offering a last maternal benediction. She had requested that her body eventually be interred at the convent of St. Mary Magdalene in Jerusalem, a wish fulfilled nearly 2 decades later, in 1988. In that act of final pilgrimage, she came home to the faith that had sustained her. Her tomb lies on the Mount of Olives, where pilgrims and visitors sometimes pay their respects to a princess who embraced poverty, a member of royalty who saved lives, and a mother who, despite it all, never truly lost sight of her son. Thank you for joining me on this fascinating exploration of Princess Alice's remarkable life, a story of resilience, faith, and compassion that resonates across generations. If you found this as captivating as I did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I can't wait to bring you even more hidden histories and compelling stories in our next video.